Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Our tradition before hearing from our speakers is to go around and introduce ourselves first. Just by a show of hands, is there anybody here for the first time or back after a long absence? Great. My name is Tom.
I'm Pat.
Greg.
My name is Michael.
Silas.
I'm Jesse.
Richard.
I'm Jim.
Todd.
I'm Rob.
Mike.
Matthew.
James. Larry.
My name is Oswaldo.
My name is Kat.
Jack.
My name is Clark. Vince.
My name is David.
I'm Michael. I'm John. Michael. Jason.
I'm Hal.
Peter.
My name is Joe.
Jay.
Terrific. Our speaker today is our very own David Lewis. He has been following the Dharma path for over 40 years and has a degree in comparative religious studies. He started out in the Tibetan Shambhala tradition and has been practicing Vipassana meditation since moving to San Francisco 30 years ago. For the past 10 years, he has been teaching and practicing intensively. David is a member of the Mission Dharma Sangha, where he teaches an Introduction to Insight meditation class. He's a longtime member of the Gay Buddhist Fellowship and also leads a weekly sitting group for seniors every Friday morning. David is currently enrolled in the Spirit Rock Meditations Center's Advanced Practitioners Program and has been on the teaching team for Spirit Rock retreats. David, welcome back.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the tragedy in Oakland. Some of you might know somebody, or know somebody that knows somebody, or know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that's missing or unaccounted for. So we hold them in our hearts. It was my topic today comes from a talk that Jack Kornfield gave called "Practicing the Dharma in Uncertain Times," and it's about current events. And some of you may have seen that. I think you posted at least one part of it on the Facebook page. And I might read part of it at some point. But you can look it up on our Facebook page, and you can also look it up on Jack Kornfield's, that's spelled with a K, Kornfield's webpage. It's a two-part teaching that he gave. And I just like the title. And I understand that last week the Sangha had a discussion on this topic. And I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'd be better prepared today if I had been here last week. But I got more than one request from Sangha members asking that we continue the discussion. Some people were interested in what do we do now. Somebody else was interested in what's the Buddhist response. What do we as Buddhists think of this? And somebody else suggested we talk about community. I feel singularly unqualified to talk about what's going on right now, because my practice since the election has been mostly just sitting with my feelings, which change all the time. Grief, sadness, not anger so far, surprisingly, embarrassment, a whole lot of them. I've just been trying to sit with my feelings, which seems like an important place to start. The Buddha said, all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never departing shadow. That's from the Dhammapada. So, in responding to current events, one place the Buddhist teachings suggest we start is with our own minds. What's our motivation? What's our intention? What's our response coming from? Is it arising from anger? Is it arising from fear? That's the beginning of karma. Karma, of course, is literally translated as action. So the Buddha talked quite a bit about action. And I'm kind of winging it here, even though I have a talk all printed out. I don't want to read it. So the beginning of action is mind. And because of that, that's what we tend to talk about in Buddhist circles. And because of that, we Buddhists kind of have a reputation when it comes to activism and action as being complacent, which I think is rather unfair. I think it comes from a lack of understanding from people that don't do the practice that we do. Because it's been my experience that in a number of activist causes that I've been involved with over the years, Buddhists are often on the front line, as are Quakers, another quiet group. So I think this reputation for complacency is not deserved. But we do advocate, and the Buddha advocated as Buddhists, that we take a moment to go inwards, and maybe more than a moment, and carefully explore what's going on in our own motivations, in our own hearts, in our own minds, before we act. And that means sometimes taking a step back before taking a step forward into action. But it's really important because our actions will be determined by the status of our hearts and our minds. And the trainings, practices that the Buddha offered us are practices to train the heart and the mind towards love, towards peace, towards acceptance, and wisdom. These are the things that are valued in our tradition. So the Buddha never said don't act in the world. The Buddha was actually quite active. He moderated disputes between kings and leaders, it's in the suttas. A good part of his family was wiped out in a war. There's a story of the Buddha showing up in a village where some of his family were the leaders of the village actually, in his teaching rounds, showing up in the village and finding everybody dead. So the Buddha knew about action, and he advocated compassion as a response. And that's been the tradition for 2,600 years. I hope I remember to come back to that, but I'm reminded of a story you may have heard of a Tibetan Rinpoche who was imprisoned by the Chinese when the Chinese invaded Tibet. They actually imprisoned quite a number of monks, some of whom were probably still in prison in China. But this guy, after 25 years or so, finally was released, having spent a good chunk of his life in a Chinese prison. And he was interviewed by a Western journalist, and the Western journalist asked him if there was what the hardest part of being in a Chinese prison was. And he responded, the hardest part was not having ill will for his captors. So that's a very Buddhist response. The important thing is not having ill will for those people that may have ill will for us. So the beginning, or the essential Buddhist response to what's happening in our country right now is no different than the Buddhist response to everything you've been hearing about at GBF for all these years that you've been coming. That there's dukkha in the world, there's suffering, there's stress. There's a cause for dukkha, and there's responses to dukkha. Very often when we talk about dukkha, we're talking about our own stuff. Our confusion, our fear, our diseases, our stresses in our life, our work, our families. But there's national dukkha, and there's international dukkha. The world's in a tumultuous phase right now. There's an awful lot of dukkha in the world. And this is exactly what the Buddha taught about. So this is what we've been practicing for, what's going on right now. It's not such a terrible anomaly. It's history at work. It's the pendulum swinging. And for 2,600 years, we Buddhists have had a way of responding to war, to politics, to despots, kings and princes. And it's pretty much what you've been hearing at GBF. So, doing the practice, you're already there. You've already started. You're already doing the practice, just by virtue of being here this morning. I was really touched by the sit this morning. I'm just aware of sitting in this room with a bunch of friends and being quiet. And it's so against the stream to what's going on nowadays. I think one thing that I've noticed, I've been kind of trying to protect myself from the news and from the world because I'm not ready to jump into papancha yet. Papancha is the Pali word for obsessive thinking. May ring a bell to you, obsessive thinking. But we've had a trauma. And traditionally, or not traditionally, but it's my understanding, I'm not a psychologist, but there's three most common responses to trauma are fight, flight, or freeze. And it seems like an awful lot of people that I've come into contact with, friends and neighbors, are in one of those states, are dealing with trauma. Fight, flight, or freeze. So, think for a minute. See if any of that rings true for you. I think freezing is maybe the most appropriate one for me, is I just need to sit with this for a while. But eventually, we need to work out of that trauma. And I know from hearing from a few of you, talking to a lot of friends, that we want to know how to respond in the world. What can we do when it's time to act? And I don't have an answer for that. That's not what I'm talking about today. I think it's going to be apparent. I think there's going to be many opportunities for doing something, for responding. You're going to have a lot of choices. Whether you're a leader or whether you're more of a foot soldier as I am. But the Buddha recommended, and I'm with him on this, that as I said in the beginning, it's important to know what your intention is and where you're coming from. Because if you act out of anger, the consequences may not be what you would wish them to be. So I want to talk a little bit more about the personal part of response. But then I want to hear about from whatever you have to say about any of this. The third noble truth, first noble truth is that there's dukkha. Second noble truth is that clinging is the cause of dukkha. Clinging can be clinging to views and opinions, amongst other things. The Buddha specifically selected out views and opinions as something to be let go of. Letting go is a third noble truth. And that's the cause of happiness or freedom or release. The Buddha said, be very careful about views and opinions. And that's kind of what I've been avoiding these last few weeks, is getting caught up in too many views and opinions, either mine or other people's, including the news. The trouble with views and opinions, and I find especially Americans, Westerns, have a really hard time wrapping their minds around this idea of not having views and opinions or not giving them great weight, because we're so addicted to them, right? It's what we do. It's our identity very often. My views and opinions are my identity. It's what makes us us and them them. They have different views and opinions. It separates us. So that's one problem. It separates people. It separates beings. Another problem with views and opinions is once you have a set opinion, just settle on something, your mind closes. It's no longer open to other possibilities. And the third problem with views and opinions is that we often mistake them for action. So a lot of people are talking right now, but it's not necessarily having an impact on the world. And so the Buddha said, be very careful about views and opinions. They put you in a box and they sometimes stop you from acting. The last time I spoke here was before the election. Some of you may have been here, and it kind of makes me, I don't know, how does that make me feel? It was a whole different world before the election. And I remember sitting here saying, aren't we all going to be glad when this is over? And we thought it was going to be over in a couple of weeks. That might have been a view and opinion that was more unskillful than I thought it was. A view that I had that Hillary was going to win, that there's no way that Donald Trump could be made president. I really believed that. I think most of my friends did. So I didn't give money. I didn't put a poster in my window. I didn't put a bumper sticker in my car. I didn't volunteer at the call center. I didn't do a lot of things because I had this view that everything was going to be okay. If I'd been able to see what was going to happen, I think my behavior would have been quite different. So that's just an example of how our views and opinions influence our actions or don't influence our actions. The other thing I used in my last talk here a month or two ago was the serenity prayer. I just want to repeat it today. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Reinhold Niebuhr, American theologian. One of the interesting things about the serenity prayer, I find it to be a very Buddhist statement. One of the interesting things is the first thing that he talks about, the first point he makes, is the letting go part, not the doing part. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. It's very Buddhist. The Buddhists talked a lot about acceptance. And I think in terms of current events, a lot of us might be in denial. We're not quite ready to accept the status of things. And that's okay for the time being. But the day will come when acceptance is important, because we won't take action if we don't accept the status of things. It doesn't mean it's okay. Our political system, or the people that are currently in power, or people that are going to be in power, we have to accept that this change has happened, or we might not act. Non-acceptance is often met with denial, crawling into a hole and pulling the door shut. I can understand the temptation. So, acceptance of the nature of things comes in the Serenity Prayer, and in Buddhism comes before taking action. So I'm mostly interested, because I've heard from a few of you, in what you have to say, and also questions. If you have questions about Buddhist response, or any response. But first I'd like to read one of the first part of Jack Kornfield's message to the Buddhist community. I know for sure the second part is on Facebook, but, and this one's shorter. So it's a kind of introduction to discussion. Bear with me. These are Jack Kornfield's words. When times are uncertain, difficult, fearful, full of change, they become the perfect place to deepen the practice of awakening. After viewing the elections, whatever your point of view, take time to quiet the mind and tend to the heart. Then go out and look at the sky. Remember the vastness. There are seasons to all things, gain and loss, praise and blame, expansion and contraction. Learn from the trees. Practice equanimity and steadiness. Remember the timeless dharma amidst it all. Think of the best of human goodness. Let yourself become a beacon of integrity with your thoughts, words, or deeds, and deeds. Integrity in speech and action, virtue and non-harming bring blessings. Remember the noble truths, no matter the politics or the season. Greed, hatred, and ignorance cause suffering. Let them go. Love, generosity, and wisdom bring the end of suffering. Foster them. Remember the Buddhist counsel. Quote, hatred never ends by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. End quote. The human heart has freedom in itself to choose love, dignity, and respect. In every circumstance, embody respect and cultivate compassion for all. Let yourself become a beacon of the Dharma. Amidst the changes, shine in courage and trust. Amidst the changes, shine with courage and trust. Love people. This is your world. Plant seeds of goodness and water them everywhere. Then blessings will grow for yourself and all. So, that's about all I have to say. I'm sure we'll think of more as we have a discussion, but I'm pretty interested in what's up for you and what you have to offer, wisdom of the Sangha. So, please.
Well, it was mentioned, first of all, I just want to say how grateful I am to have this place to come to on Sunday mornings. It means a lot. And how grateful I am to the practice. It was mentioned last week that, one of the ways you deal with what's going on is just getting back to the present. And so how I've gotten through these weeks since the election, and foremost, to not let it interfere with me being present with my students and doing my job, to not let it interfere with my health or my mental state. And so it's all about, it's through, for me, just doing the practice and being present. And some years ago, I had this realization while washing the dishes. And it's really something that set me on the path that I'm on now. And I was washing the dishes when suddenly I realized, this moment, me washing the dishes, is no more important or no less important than any other moment in my life. And so what I've been doing when I meditate or when I just practice mindfulness throughout the day is that whether it's a really big worry or just a little worry, you handle it in the same way. And it's back to, not being controlled by the things that you can't control. And when you said, that there will be opportunities, that's kind of what I've been feeling is that the opportunities will arise when there's action to be taken. But until then, so I really thank this place and thank all of you.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for acknowledging the Sangha, because I think it's in times of difficulty we need each other more. I went to a day-long retreat with a European Buddhist teacher named Martin Aylward, and just last weekend, and he said several times, he said what you just said. He said, take a moment to appreciate the goodness of the practice, and take a moment to appreciate the goodness of Sangha, and simply sit in the appreciation of the goodness of Sangha, the goodness of the practice. And that really spoke to me. So thank you for acknowledging the goodness of Sangha and practice. David, please.
I want to hear what you thought about the first part of the serenity prayer, coming to acceptance with things you can't change. It seems like it's so, in our society and myself, we're so focused on there's always something you can do. Just sit with it and there'll be something you can do, rather than, it's almost like when you come to the point of, and I'm also thinking about, health issues in our life or other losses. And so often you're thinking about, well, there's got to be something I can do. What about this? What about that? And your friends are saying this or that. Coming to acceptance when you're in aversion initially has a sadness to it. So my question is two parts. How do you know when you come to that point where there's nothing you can do about it? And two, when you decide there's nothing you can do about it, how do you deal with the sadness of that?
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because as you said, in our culture, and especially Americans, we're really good at doing. we're doers. And we, I find a lot of people have have a certain amount of discomfort with acceptance and letting go. In Buddhism, we're much better at doing something. So we just want to skip over the acceptance part and get to doing something. So that's why I think there's such great wisdom in the Serenity Prayer. I don't know if I can answer at what point do you know when it's time to accept and when it's time to do. It depends on the circumstances, and it depends on your state of mind, and it depends on the event that you're talking about. But there's great freedom, I find, in letting go and acceptance. Because what that is, essentially, is seeing things as they are. You're seeing the nature of reality. This man has been elected president. That's the nature of reality. So that's an acceptance, which I find some people are not there yet. Once we've accepted that, now it's time to do something, or whenever it is time for us. But like health is another really good, it's an example that I can relate to. Is if you have health issues, there's things you can do and there's things you can't do. And acceptance will bring you some peace. Please, Clark.
So, I remember when I was in the dedicated practitioners program at Spirit Rock, Guy Armstrong gave this talk about wrong view. And it doesn't say anywhere in the Four Noble Truths acceptance. It does say there that the way out is through the Eightfold Path, and one of the branches of the Eightfold Path is right view. So implicit within the fundamental teachings of Buddhism is that there is a wrong view. And I think the health example is a great example. We could console ourselves and think that we're accepting things because we're only seeing things that are possible. But actually it turns out that people who have overly optimistic views of their ability to get over cancer, the book's Positive Illusions by Shelley Taylor, they actually do better than people who seemingly accept what the truth is. And I think of my sister, she was diagnosed with cancer 12 or 13 years ago. And they said there's an 85% chance she'd die within 5 years. And I asked the doctor, what is the chance that she'll live past 10 years? And she said, oh, there's no chance. That was his view at the time. It turned out to be kind of wrong. And so that's why I find acceptance is consoling, it's comforting. It's like in Tibetan Buddhism is a teaching of subtle laxity, that we can be meditating and think like we're advancing because it's comfortable, and we think that's nirvana, but actually it's just subtle laxity. We're not really seeing things as they are. So part of me feels like I'm so triggered by the word of acceptance, because like even in Jack's message about look to the trees and look how things are and look how things come and go, it's like the message, ironically, right outside Spirit Rock, where there's like all these brown fields many times where there used to be green grass, is that time is running out. We've elected someone, with Electoral College has elected somebody that doesn't believe in global warming. There is no time. There is no time for acceptance. There's no time for thinking that, in my view, there is no time for thinking that somehow things will always work out for the best, or there are seasons. That was another part of his quote, which is just, to my mind, that's just wrong view. There's nowhere in Buddhism that says everything will work out or everything happens for a good reason. Like things could turn out really awful, and there's no reason to sort of sit back and think that the seasons come and the seasons go. And there is a part that says there are the worldly winds of praise and blame, gain and loss, and fame and ill repute. But there's no reason to think that if we're just accepting and acquiescent, that it'll all turn out okay. This could be the last year. We might not make it another year. There's so many ways that Donald Trump could destroy our world. And I remember being on the retreat and saying at the time, I did not have the view, as you may remember. I did not have the view that everything would turn out okay. And I said, look around, it's beautiful. Tibet River is even more beautiful than this. And I said, all of Tibet was lost forever. There's no reason people will ever come back. It's not like things come and things go. It's lost forever. Because the Dalai Lama and others thought that China wasn't really a threat. They didn't really have to worry about things. They could have gone another way. The Dalai Lama wears a watch, a Patek Philippe watch. It was a gift from Roosevelt that was given to him by CIA OSS officers, so the predecessors to the CIA. And the Dalai Lama chose not to accept the overtures of the United States. And all the nuns who were raped and all the monks who were killed and the little Tibetan terriers who were terrified could have been saved if there had not been this denial about how bad China was and is. But having said that, I also think like everybody has their own way of making a contribution. And for some people, it's, there's a guy who was in front of a mosque and said, we care about you. And I thought, wow, that's so amazing. Somebody would do that and think to do that. And there might be people who donate to political causes or who write columns or who do different things. And there's so many different ways of action, which I think does include the action of realizing oh my God, I'm so freaked out, I don't know what to do right now that would be helpful. And different people come to that, I think, in different ways of when they're ready to act and how to act.
Thank you, Clark. I was talking to a scientist a week ago about some of what you were talking about. And he had a really kind of, for me, mind-blowing perspective, which was that, well, we've already passed the tipping point. The Earth is finished. He says, we're a overpopulated anthill in the universe. He said, from the perspective of the universe, it doesn't matter. Maybe there's multiple universes. There's planets being born and dying. I mean, it's not my point of view, but it was really interesting. What do you think?
Yeah,
it's really the big picture.
Are we past the tipping point or not? You don't know. That's an interesting point. You could use that as acceptance, right? We're past the tipping point, nothing to do. Or we're going to try our best. I don't feel I don't know if any of you about the environment, about whether we're past the tipping point or not. I guess I feel sort of a vague faith that, well, who knows? There are lots of things with the environment or the illness that we thought we'd never get over them, and then somebody figures out a way to get over them. The politics part, I think, is much harder. It's it's only 35% of the American politics that were surveyed recently that believe that democracy is necessary. It's gone down from 65%. So the argument could easily be made that, it's over. And I will say, sort of in my own life, I have immediately after the election, actually a couple of weeks afterwards, I initiated the process of reclaiming my grandparents' ancestry as in Poland and Germany, so that I can have a passport to leave before it's too late if I have to.
Please.
Well, I have to take a deep breath on that note before we change the subject. But I think to bring the attention back to the room, I wanted to say that I was with all the stress, I was very encouraged by the comments and the emails about the forming spiritual friends groups. And maybe somebody has some information about that they can address. But this year, and I didn't get permission from the rest of the board members to bring this up, but I think this is a time where just emotionally, I think it's been a theme. Invigorating the Sangha has been a theme for the board for this whole year. And in various ways, showing gratitude to the people who volunteer, the hosts, the facilitators, and showing appreciation to them was one theme. Looking for ways to mutual support, which maybe the spiritual friends groups will really take the lead on that. And one thing that we came up with in the summer, and we weren't going to announce it until February, was the day long that we were going to do it and hopefully begin as an annual tradition, a day-long in March. And so we do have one set up for this year. And as I say, we weren't going to announce it until later on, but it is all set to go. And I thought maybe just now emotionally the Sangha would like to hear that there is more going on behind the scenes, and there is hopefully more support and mutual appreciation. The day long is, and I'll put some flyers out front. There's no hurry to sign up or anything, but it's set up for March 25th, so you can just kind of mark the date. And it's going to be led by Heather Sundberg. And the theme we set up was celebrating the community, generosity, and gratitude for the Sangha. And so she liked that theme too. And it's going to be free. The Sangha has enough resources to rent the hall. It'll be here. And there'll be dana for the teacher, but lunch will be included and the day long here. So I don't have too much more to say, but I'll put these flyers out. The website for registration is active. If you want to go and sign up sooner, that's fine too. But there'll be more reminders coming in February and March. And hopefully this will become a tradition in addition to the fall, residential retreat.
I'm really happy to hear that. That's a wonderful thing. Tom?
Thank you, David. And thank you for the good news. That sounds great. First thing I just want to acknowledge is something a friend shared yesterday, and that's, not everybody here is comfortable speaking in a large group format. Some people do much better in the small groups that we have periodically, so I just want to acknowledge that, that we often don't hear from everybody, or have time to hear from everybody. This idea of acceptance is, I think, really interesting because for me, what I experience is the uncertainty of what I cannot change and what I can change is a great source of dukkha. Like not knowing and wondering, like, okay, is this something I should accept or is this something I shouldn't, is really a great source of stress. I understand the concept. It's not foreign to me. But knowing when to do it is really the tough part. And Jay Davidson shared something I thought that was really profound from an author, and that is understanding the difference between our sphere of concern, is that the right term? Mm-hmm. Our sphere of concern, which could be global, and our sphere of influence. And not to be so caught up in that larger sphere that we are set to inaction. And then finally, one of the pieces from Jack Kornfield about one of the things you read was planting seeds of goodness. And it made me realize that as all of this has unfolded, I've become hyper-vigilant about harm that may be coming. You see this in the media, like everybody's awful. He's so bad, and he's nominated this person, which could translate into global catastrophe, Some of those things, some of those predictions may come to pass, but I feel that, not every single one of them will be the absolute worst case scenario. And so I've become hyper-vigilant, just even in walking down the street, is that graffiti something that showed up since Trump was elected, And so what I found for myself is to plant seeds of goodness in small ways, like just smiling at someone as I walk down the street or as I greet them at the cash register or wherever. Because not everyone has a practice like we do. Not everyone has grounding. They may feel even more unsettled than we are. And so I've noticed that when I do that, when I just smile at somebody, they just brighten up. It's like they have a lift in their step as we pass each other or something. And I think that's something that we can do to counter what's overlaying on us from the media. I'm not saying that the media has fallen short in a lot of ways in not anticipating and calling things out, and so maybe now they're doing more of that. But anyway, it's just it's tough to balance, but then there are things you can do that are positive, and that's what I like to take refuge in.
Thanks so much for that. I'm glad you brought up the stress of trying to balance and what I can influence and what I can't influence, because it's something I meant to talk about and forgot, is burnout. I'm here talking about acceptance and letting go, but I have some cred as an activist. I was beat up and arrested at Nixon's second inauguration in 1973, where the protest crowd was larger than the inauguration crowd, and they called out the National Guard. And I was also in ACT UP. And what I saw, especially in ACT UP, is some of the most impassioned activists were acting out of anger. And they were doing absolutely amazing things, but they didn't last very long. And I mean that in two ways. People actually died. And I ascribe it, I think they were dying of anger. And other people just burned out and quit because it was just too much stress. And that really was an enormous lesson for me about taking care of yourself and in times of activism, when you're out there taking action. It's so very important, because if you don't do some self-care, and if your motivations are unskillful ones rather than skillful ones, I'm not just talking about love versus anger, but kindness, compassion. Burnout is quite common. And I'm sure many of you have seen it and perhaps experienced it. So,
I will say about the Serenity Prayer, there are times when I find it better for myself to change it just slightly and say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change right now. And go on from there, because really that brings me some peace. Like, I don't know if I can change it ever, but I'm pretty sure I can't change it right now. And that, for me, is just a way to ameliorate that stress of like, okay, am I letting this go? Like, do I slip into depression because I'm like saying I'm giving up? And so I don't really have to go to that step. I can just say, okay, I know I can't change it right now because I'm just sitting on the cushion, so that helps.
Works for me.
I just want to come back to this notion of the sangha, and that we talked about last week, and which has a number of people have talked about individually today and otherwise, because I think the sangha is really a critical dimension of our practice, and it provides both a context for understanding and developing one's practice, and it is a refuge, I think, and it is a therapeutic community, I think, and so I am glad to hear that the board, the people who give leadership to the Sangha, have been talking about this, because I think it's really critical, and I would like to hear more. And we talked about this last week, including doing more social things, including trying to develop other vehicles, whether it be this small kind of spiritual-based listservs or other things that are social, perhaps social/political/ whatever. I think all of these strategies are important right now. I just want to say that.
I'm so happy we're even talking about it, and that there's that interest is out there.
Back to the acceptance thing. It seems to me that sometimes when I accept that I can't do anything about X, it shifts my position a little bit, and but I can do something about Y. Having let go of something that I was glommed onto allows me to see something else.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what I was saying about opinions. So if your mind is not yet closed, then something else might come along that enlightens you. So it's true both for opinions and for action. Knowing when to let go. Thank you. Silas.
I really appreciate this whole discussion about acceptance, and I like the way that you and other people have been kind of framing acceptance and non-action as different things, and acceptance is really more about kind of wisdom and discernment rather than just not doing anything. I feel like, just like so many people, I feel like, like in the last month, my kind of belief in the practice, or in the practice and the deepening was really felt like has really been tested, or really been pushed. And I think one of the things that's been hard for me about accepting this kind of new world we're in is that I feel like I'm not actually one of the people that's very vulnerable, that's going to be totally affected. Of course, we're all going to be affected, but I feel like, I don't know, like I'm this like super privileged, like white gay man, live in this like really kind of bubble of a place. Like I don't think that I'm personally going to be all that affected by these policies, but like my roommate teaches bilingual elementary school, and like her students, like their families are all undocumented, and like their families are going to be torn apart, and like they will be. I mean, just you know what I mean? Like the consequences for them are just going to be huge, and so I think it's really hard. I mean, it's been really hard for me to accept all this. I think again because it's like in some ways it would be so easy for me to accept it, but I don't know if that makes any sense.
But you have such a big heart in just acknowledging that and acknowledging your privilege. My funny story is my nephew has a 10-year-old son who's my godson. He's a really cute little 10-year-old, and they had a family discussion after the election with him and his sister and the parents about what this all means, and they've always been great about talking with their kids about what's going on, and they had a discussion. Everybody was very upset in the family, this privileged white family, talking about Muslims and immigrants and gay people. And in the middle of this discussion, the little 10-year-old who had said a thing said, "Well, we could keep Uncle David in the attic like Anne Frank." So it's touching everybody.
I hate to be we're running out of time. However, I will offer this. Would there be an interest in continuing the discussion 10 minutes, going 10 minutes over?
Yeah.
Since we're here and gathered, and we don't have this opportunity. And do not feel bad if you have to get up and leave, please. So, why don't we do that? We'll go 10 more minutes of discussion, and we'll have announcements and close.
Yeah, continuing what Silas was just saying, I was thinking the same thing about, I'm going to be fine. And then my thoughts go to all the people who are being targeted and thinking, compassion is a bitch, because I feel like feeling empathy for other people is what is part of what has been making me feel so depressed about what's happened as we prepare to be governed for people who don't even have a passing knowledge of what compassion for other people means. It's just a word in the dictionary, and none of their actions indicate that they have an understanding or an interest to incorporate that in their lives.
Yeah.
That's what's been probably the hardest part for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate your bringing up the difficulties of compassion, and that's something that teachers of engaged Buddhism talk about. It's not something that I have much expertise in, but if any of you are interested in following up on engaged Buddhism practices, see if I can find it. I have a short list of teachers. David Lloyd, these are all people that have written books or have Dharma talks. David Lloyd, Donald Rothberg, who's local, Joanna Macy, and Bhikkhu Bodhi have all written extensively about engaged Buddhism. And if you want any of those referrals, either email me or see me afterwards, and I'll repeat it.
I just want to say two things. One is we are all concerned and anxious about those people and these appointees and all, but we don't know. And I think it's very important to live in the moment. Already there are changes. I mean, there have been shifts, and we don't know what this guy's going to do or what he's really going to be like. So I think it's really more important, and I struggle with this. I mean, not to awfulize and just be in the moment and let's take one day at a time, as the 12-step programs say, you know. And even as we speak, I mean, there are glimmers of hope. I mean, the far-right party in Austria was defeated last night.
Oh, I hadn't heard that yet.
And
Good
and
news.
so, and this was a country's history of anti-Semitism, and you know, all of that. I mean, and who knows if the Italian elections are today? So we'll see what happens there. But I think that we don't know, and but I really like the theme we've been discussing of accepting and trying to understand without controlling and also without kind of, you know, awfulizing, because I think we really do have to take one day at a time.
Projecting into the future is pretty stressful activity. Alan?
Thank you, David. I appreciated how you started your talk talking about centering oneself and examining one's feelings, because our feelings are really at a high pitch in this nation right now, and they're very influential. I mean, when we feel fear, I think the first thing our mind does is start constructing fantasies of what could happen, and it's very difficult to counteract that kind of powerful mind action. You know? And the other dominating feeling is grief and sadness, and that tends to make one feel inert. You know, it has inertia that prevents us from taking action. So, just again, thank you for reminding me that that's the first foundation of mindfulness, is examining your feeling tones.
Second,
thank you. First one is body, right?
First one's body.
Thank you.
Which is a great thing to bring up too, because when all else is lost, when you're overwhelmed, when you're really stressed out, when your mind just gets the better of you, you've got the foundation of the body. Just come back to your breath. The admonition of take a deep breath is a good suggestion. Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a word about trauma, because you mentioned that, and I think most of us experience some level of trauma in our families or just in the act of getting to adulthood. And what I noticed for myself is that the sort of societal trauma of the election has triggered things personally for me. So in a very, all of the losses I've experienced, the trauma that I experienced, and the useful part of that is that I feel a sense of resolve about, for me in particular, it's about finding my voice, because I grew up in a family with some characters like Donald Trump, and my personal defense was just to go mute. And so it's useful to look at that, and I certainly encourage people to look at the particular way, personally, that it triggers things, because part of practice is also freeing ourselves from our conditioning.
Yeah.
And so one of my commitments has been to intervene on behalf of people who are vulnerable and targeted, and to find a skillful way to do that.
So we have 2 more minutes.
Well, to further muddle the subject of compassion, then personally I'm a refugee from Pennsylvania in the 70s and 80s. Back in the days when ministers could, they have license to say kill gay people, and it was an obvious defense in killing gay people in court that he looked at me and triggered a response, and juries would let them off. So there's that context historically, just in our lifetime. But and my family is back there in many minds on Donald Trump in this election. But the reason I spoke is that there was a letter circulating from a monk in the Plum Village community, and I can't remember his name, but you may have seen it since the election. And it took me a long time rereading it to actually, find the compassion that he was talking about. But what he basically was saying was, there's a lot of emotion and reaction and anger and hurt to the surprise of the election. But call upon your ability to look to the people in those areas who suffered for a long time in the cultural war, cultural changes, and couldn't cope with it and haven't coped with it and found a voice in this election. And whether it's their economic suffering or their personal suffering or just why they're so hateful, and sit with that, and sit with some compassion for the last 40 years that they've had, as opposed to my 40 years of just checking out of there and coming to a place where I would have been a privileged white gay professional in any environment, but would not have been happy there, and found a lot more sense of community and support here. But for all those different variations, I'm still struggling a couple of weeks later with meditating over that letter, and I even have roots in that area. But I think it is something to consider. It's not all about compassion for ourselves or even the possible victims of the election.
Yeah, it's the way I tend to look at that one, and I find it somewhat helpful, is that they're a lot like me, that they are suffering too, and they're motivated by the desire to be happy, just like me. We just have different agendas.
Thank you, David, for leading the discussion, and thank you everyone for participating. Your patience. Next week, our speaker will be Dorothy Hunt. She's been with us several times, and in fact, last quarter's newsletter had a great talk from her. She's the spiritual director of Moon Mountain Sangha, and aligned with Adyashanti. She's practiced psychotherapy since '67. She's the founder of the San Francisco Center for Meditation and Psychotherapy, and focuses on self-inquiry, and I could go on and on. But she's here in the newsletter, and so join us for that. Dana is the Pali word for giving. That's what sustains the Sangha, so please be generous. Our host will go around with the Dana bowl if you don't find the Dana bowl yourself. So we have a social period afterwards. Our host today, Mike.
I'm the host, and there are some refreshments, the rules, so to speak. So just help yourself and put your dishes in the dishwasher.
The dishwasher.
And I'll go around with the
clean.
Dana.
So the dishwasher's full but clean. So.
Oh, okay. So
we might have to do something about
all right.
that. Don't put them right into the
rinse them out with the hot soapy water.
Other announcements? Well, I have an announcement, not fully formed, but so I had put out on the Yahoo listserv just an inquiry, like, are people interested in spiritual friends groups? I put some attachments or links to guidelines which you can read. But in a nutshell, a spiritual friends group is a group that meets in person of 8 to 12 people in total, which means when you do meet, you probably end up with 6 to 8 people, which is a good sized group. Periodically, someone's home has a facilitator or rotating facilitators, and is intended to help create small formations where the Sangha can come together and talk about your practice. So it's intended that you have a practice outside of just meeting there. Like a daily practice would be good, because then you can share with each other how that's going. It can also be focused on perhaps a book group. That could be the foundation of it. I have a personal interest in forming one that perhaps helps us address how we bring the Dharma to dealing with aging parents or aging family members and dementia, things like that. So I just put that out there. That's something that we're sort of thinking about, talking about. But I'm not really going to like lead this whole effort and stuff. So I really did just want to find out, like, is there an interest? And it sounds like there's some interest. Al has said, has put it out that a newspaper would be nice and has had several responses. So, I mean, I'm not going to call for a show of hands or anything, but think about that and participate in the discussions that might be coming.
If we respond to that email, would you like us to respond just to you or to everybody?
Respond to everybody so that people can see, like, okay, there's other, stuff going on. I mean, it's not intended to be secretive. So, anyway, that's all I have, unless somebody else wants to add something on the topic of spiritual friends groups. Okay. Any other announcements?
I just want to mention my partner and I and Robert Chan, who sometimes comes here, are in Golden Gate Men's Chorus. And our concerts start this coming Thursday. We're going to have 5 concerts. I have cards about them. They're at a lovely church across from Mission Dolores, and we do a great variety of music. So if you're interested, let me know. Hope you come in.
Thank you. There are also free books on the table if you've not gotten one yet. Shame on you. So let's stand for a meditation. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives. Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.